there are still incidents, of course, that we witness for intimidation, violence, but they erupt from time to time because of these rogue elements that believe that they can take the law into their own hands. But to a large extent, there's been general peace and stability in the country, and I think which has been confirmed by anyone.
So what do you see now as the challenges? We'll say just even take it over the next 12 months.
Well, I think the challenges are to restore the confidence in the country again, to reconstruct the country, to make sure that we can provide the hope that Zimbabweans deserve and demand. To me, that's the most biggest challenge. How do we make sure that this transition is irreversible, that we can see the country moving forward positively, reconstruct, provide jobs for the people, provide real change for the people? That's the direction we have to take the country, and that it is not sliding back to violence, acrimony, and all those negative attributes that characterize the Zimbabwean state.
And what about outside countries, let's say outside Africa to begin with, countries like Ireland? You know, we've followed closely the events in Zimbabwe and your progress to power. What can countries like Ireland do in terms of supporting you without interfering directly in your affairs?
Well, first and foremost, I think people have to, the international community must recognize that there is progress, not sufficient, but I think there is progress that needs to be rewarded by support, not just humanitarian support, but developmental support, so that the level of decay that has come in the country, we can lift it up, and that the people of Zimbabwe will benefit. So that kind of support is what we are looking forward to partnership, normalizing relations, making sure that, again, Zimbabwe is part of the family of nations. That's what the international community will help us.
Have all the sanctions that were there during Mugabe's time when he wasn't cooperating, have they been lifted now?
No, not yet. I mean, we are in the process of negotiating between the European Union and Zimbabwe. The EU-Zimbabwe dialogue is being kick-started. Those issues will come up and we'll be able to resolve, together with other legitimate concerns that have hindered normalization of relations with the European Union.
And what about South Africa? Again, many people were critical of the previous South African President, Thabo Mbeki. He was seen as somebody who very much supported Robert Mugabe, didn't do enough to criticise Mugabe when his people were intimidating people like yourself and those involved in the movement for democratic change.
Well, I don't want to make a personal assessment of Thabo Mbeki. Thabo Mbeki is no longer President of South Africa. We have a special relationship with South Africa because of our economic and social conditions. South Africa is an important neighbor. I think that South Africa, when it looks at Zimbabwe, it is not a foreign policy issue. It is a domestic issue. Because the implications of what happens, any instability in Zimbabwe is a direct correlation to the instability in South Africa because of the movement of people in our country. So Zimbabwe needs to be stable for the region to be stable and progress.
And just going back again to, we'll say, the challenges of the next couple of years. At some stage, Mugabe is going to have to step down as president. What do you think is the danger, or what's the potential for, we'll say, another dictator like Mugabe to have his eye on the presidential position and perhaps replace Mugabe, or that Mugabe would be replaced with somebody who is equally maybe capable of being a dictator and making life very difficult for you?
The life is not as foolproof as that. The only thing is that the people of Zimbabwe have experienced, for the last 30 years, an unacceptable level of governance, which is unacceptable, and therefore are pushing for change in order to move away from personalities, move away from privatization of the national state by an individual and dominance by an individual. I think that most Zimbabweans are committed to democratic change and democratic principles. And therefore, it will be one that will guarantee and mitigate against any possible dictator that may have that may emerge either from ZANU-PF or anything else. I think the country will be on a path to democratic dispensation as we move forward.
And what about the white farmers? Because, of course, a lot of the trouble began way back, I think, was it the year 2000, when Mugabe supported the land-grabbing policy, taking the farms off some of the white landowners. What's happened, or what would you like? What are your ambitions for what you do with that land now?
Well, first of all, as an Irish person, you know yourself that when when Ireland got its independence, they embarked on a very effective land reform program. There's nothing unusual. We have experienced the colonization by Britain, and one of the critical issues you have to understand is that it's not white and black. This is about addressing an imbalance, an inequitable distribution of land that has historical implications. So as far as land reform is concerned as a principle, there is convergence between ZANU-PF and MDC that we needed this land reform in order to address past historical imbalances. But the difference was that the method was one we did not subscribe to, the violence and all that. So, but as far as addressing large-scale land ownership at the expense of the majority, I think we all agree. Now, having said that, we are now in the process of trying to rationalize that process so that there is no multiple farm ownership, there is equitable distribution, there is productivity of the land. And that's what we need to address. Whether it is black or white, that will be part of that address. So
you would really support taking the land off the white farmers who may have had that land, for decades?
Hold on. It's not about taking white land.
Well, they own the land.
No. Owning the land is one thing. Land reform is a necessary principle that we all agree. Even amongst the whites themselves, they all agreed that there's need for land reform. So it's not about taking people's land. It's about addressing a historical imbalance.
So going forward then, how do you see the landscape changing in terms of the transfer of that land over to black Zimbabweans?
Naturally, there has to be a method which is equitable. There has to be a method which is lawful. There has to be a method which enhances food security for the country and productivity of the land. So there are a number of things that need to be implemented in that process.
And there are many Zimbabweans, of course, who are living outside the country. Prime Minister, not least, we have Zimbabwean communities in Ireland who have been sending back money back home, which at times has been the only thing that has sustained people in Zimbabwe. Would you like to send a message out to that diaspora to return home, or do you think it's just too early at the moment to tell how things are going to pan out in Zimbabwe?
Obviously, Zimbabweans must come home. I mean, everyone wants Zimbabweans to come home, whether in diaspora. The circumstances of political and economic refugees is known. I mean, it's not only characteristic to Zimbabwe. Any society which is destabilized creates a diaspora unnecessarily. So what we want to do is to make sure that we create conditions back home where Zimbabweans who are living. Remember that they are the professional. Yes. The professional class. The brain drain has been devastating the country. So we need them back for the reconstruction phase of the country. So my message is that, you may not actually force march or frog march people to come back to Zimbabwe, but what I would say is that they have an equal responsibility to make sure that the country is reconstructed.
Yeah, and so almost as if it's a patriotic duty to return home, you're saying? No,
I don't have to persuade anyone to come back home. They know home is always the best. So it's not as out of any patriotic call. It's their responsibility.
Just before we go, Prime Minister, and thank you so much for your time. You've been through a very rough time. You've obviously suffered terrible personal losses and tragedies. How much more of these challenging times do you think you are willing to endure to see, to really put Zimbabwe on the right path to a peaceful democracy? Why would we think that it will be a real great waste if we don't push and endure this process to a stage where we are satisfied that the country is on the right path, that we have achieved what we fought for. I think it will be a betrayal for those who died for democratic change in the country if we were to reverse or slide back to situations where there's violence against each other, where there's dictatorship and that kind of thing. And I think we should be moving towards the ideal. And I think that whatever it takes, we'll take that. And do you fear for your own safety? No. I mean, look, I'm not afraid of my own safety. As I said, if there is a risk to an individual, it's unacceptable.